Oh no.
while I've been working.
Oh
So
no.
for a video that I know I've posted at least twice, it's a video of, I'll probably paste it in here, of carnivore animals eating fruits and vegetables, and then
Hmm.
herbivore animals eating birds, eggs, mice. So
Yep.
there's a lot of misconceptions about what animals actually eat. And I've heard people say, "Oh, well, gorillas just eat leaves." No, they don't. All primates.
I believe that for years when I was a vegan, with all those people giving those seminars. Oh no, the primates don't eat anything but fruit. I believed it. I truly believed I could be vegan and thrive. I really did. And they're incorrect. Correct.
Most primates will eat basically anything that moves. Little birds, little rodents, insects, eggs, anything they come across that is edible, they will eat it. Rotting fish, a lot of these primates will eat them. Even the so-called leaf-eating monkeys will eat more than leaves, yes. And it's
Yeah.
also true that even ruminant animals like cows and goats, yep, they will gobble up a mouse if they come across it, an egg. They'll chew on bones and clay and stuff, especially if they're mineral deficient. Just herbivores aren't strictly herbivore and carnivore aren't strictly carnivore.
Right.
Basically, any animal, especially out in the wild, will eat almost anything it can. And we all know dogs, they'll go and they'll eat grasses and herbs and they'll drink from puddles, which are much more mineral rich than the tap water we give them. They know what they're doing. They're looking for nutrients.
Yeah.
So it's a huge misconception out there that any of the animals are strictly this or strictly that. Most of them are omnivorous. Most animals on this earth are omnivorous. And the ones that are not do not live very long.
Yeah.
So I think this is a fairly important point here as well, especially when it comes to dogs. Dogs are very similar to humans anatomically, believe it or not. Their digestion tract is very similar to humans. Primates, dogs, and pigs, very, very similar. And they all are omnivorous. Dogs are largely carnivore, but that's also sort of just a matter of their lifestyle. But they will chew on this and that. And if they do find fruits, they will eat them, especially when they drop to the ground near the end of the summer. They will absolutely eat them. We've all seen our dogs do this, right? So, one thing to note is that a lot of these lifespans of animals are not very impressive. The human species has beaten basically every other animal. There's only a few exceptions, like some whales, but whales live in the sea. All the minerals are in the sea, and it's not comparable anatomically to us at all. But any animal that is in the same range as us, even things like elephants and rhinos, we beat all of these animals. And I'm pretty sure it's because of our brain, because we are able to consume a wider variety of foods, but also there's this thing called the Great Leap Forward. This is relevant for pets, I promise. There's this thing called the Great Leap Forward where a lot of intellectuals think that humans discovered fire and therefore that allowed us to eat a wider variety of foods. Now we come in and say actually the fire gave us ashes. We had ashes left over, which is concentrated plant derived minerals. Humans are creatures of habit. They would throw those ashes in roughly the same place every day. And I'm sure somebody noticed eventually that the plants grew better there. I'm sure somebody noticed that the white ashes tasted pretty good and that they could eat it and that they could add it to some of their foods as a condiment and as a thickener, especially as we started cooking and got metal and all this stuff, which also came from fire. I'm just saying that extra mineral source and some of our brain power and being able to scavenge a couple more things and certain foods are more absorbable with their vitamins when they're cooked and stuff like that and we can crack open bones and get the bone marrow out. Other species can as well, but just saying our brains gave us access to more nutrients, especially in the fire aspect. And our dogs have been along this journey most of the time as well, as far as evolutionary theorists are concerned. So I have a big feeling that the reason that our dogs can live longer than a wolf or a coyote, because both of those animals max out around 14 years.
Mhm.
I have a feeling that in the wild, in captivity, some of them can do longer, but still. I have a feeling that our dogs are living longer than their wild counterparts because they have access to some of our smarter concentrated sources of minerals too. You've probably seen dogs lick the fire pit and stuff. And a lot of people say, get out of there. Stop looking, but they know what they're doing. And this is one of the reasons that domesticated dogs, I think, can live so long, even with the problems with dog foods, because they do have these extra concentrated nutrient sources in it. It's pretty
Yeah.
hard work to get all that out in the wild. And I'm going to throw it back to you, talk a little bit about dog and cat nutrition. But I just want to say, too, that my mom's dogs that I grew up with, they lived, this is a Jack Russell and then a larger mutt. They both lived to about 18, 19, 20. We're not 100% sure of their ages. They lived on the cheapest dog food available. Whatever was on sale, my mom bought. And, just kind of like a car. We bought beat up cars and we used cheap gas and they run as long as they run. We don't really care. Dogs did fine all the way until the end. Of course, by the end they had cataracts and lumps and they're peeing on the floor and stuff, but they lived a long time. They live a lot longer than a wolf. And we did give them table scraps too. This is something we say not to do. And I want to get into that with a couple of the longest lived cats and dogs on record because I think I've changed my opinion slightly on that. But yeah, we broke the rules. We broke the rules. We gave them the cheapest dog food. They had grains in them. They're super ultra processed. Like we're talking about Old Roy from Walmart and whatever else was on sale at the cheap no-name grocery stores and stuff like that. And yeah, table scraps. And I'm not talking about good, organic, wholesome table scraps. I'm talking about processed food. We grew up on processed food. We fed that to the dogs too. If they wanted it, go ahead, have a Pop-Tart. Honestly, we didn't know any better. And those dogs still lived quite a long time. I find that interesting, but I think the situation is a little bit worse now. And especially if the dog is sick, these rules no longer apply. You have to change things. If you got some hardy dogs, you got good luck.
Yeah.
And that's a different story, but
Certain things, or, and then you've got the raw foods to some of the raw foods that they're trying to be better, but they're not supplemented at all, right? I think I've maybe found two on the market that are raw or they're lightly cooked and or they're like the freeze dried, that don't have a lot of the water in it, that have some supplementation. It's challenging for people because a lot of people, they love their pets, but they like the convenience. It's just ingrained into them to throw down the kibble. Oh, and then I find too with clients I've worked with around the world that they're scared because this whole idea of that you have to have this complete diet scares them into thinking they can't do it themselves, right? So then they rely on what their vets are telling them to eat, which some of those foods are awful. The science diet and the Royal Canin. I mean, it's just not a lot of nutrients, even though they do have minerals and all that stuff in it. But it's a challenge to find a good food. And then now that I understand supplementation, I'm supplementing because I feel like, I give my dogs liver caps, they have to have the bone. There's a whole stuff that they need to have. And I always tell people it's not that hard. If they're in the wild and they're going to go have a little squirrel, how much organs are in and how much bone for their diet. It's not, brain science, but I think people are really scared. And then they just go back to the kibble because they get overwhelmed, right? There's so much information out there. So that's always been the challenge for me, or the fact that people just don't want to do it. And and I'm always been for a search for, I found this one company in Utah and it's all wild, like rabbit, bison, and it's all lean, because a lot of these raw foods, the one thing that I have found is that they have the minimum requirement of the crude fat or whatever, which they have to meet, right? The AFCO or whatever standards. Well, that's the minimum. They could have it could be 90% fat and we don't know it. So anything in excess can be bad for us. So I always find too that I've seen so many of these pets, they're eating so much of these raw food companies and then they're getting pancreatitis and then they're bile vomiting, and it's just sometimes I think over excessive, you know what I mean? It's we've kind of gone extreme. And so, yes, we need to come, right? That's hard for a lot of these dogs. A lot of these dogs are compromised with their GI tracts, I find, or they're malabsorbed.
just like humans.
Exactly. And so when they're eating these foods that have high starch in it and the meat, especially the kibbles, I think, okay, if I were making a kibble, look at the ingredients, right? And then I'm okay, so there's all these starches, there's meat here, but if you're cooking it at 400 degrees or a couple times for a shelf life, what does your food look like? It's basically probably 75% carb. Foods also might have gone extreme. And so, yes, we need to come and bridge in the middle and be okay, Like the canned foods, also my problem is mixing a lot of the starches and the proteins, right? Like that's hard for a lot of these dogs. A lot of these dogs are compromised with their GI tracts, I find. A diet, but I would supplement and make sure that they have everything that they need. And if there's like there's a company, I don't know if I should name names, but there's a one that I found, the closest one that I can find that's raw and that supplements is Open Farm. But again, it's actually, I have it right here. It's this grass-fed beef one. And it's not like frozen or, raw, but at least it's got supplementation, right? It's expensive. A lot of people might not be able to afford it. I've got little dogs. There was a time where I had a wolf hybrid, a husky, and a Malamute. And I was spending $1,000 a month on raw meat.
Jeez.
Now, I was also using a lot of herbs, and I felt like they were doing better to an extent, but one of my dogs got bone cancer. I had to amputate her leg. It was awful. I had a lot of success with my husky. He was hypothyroid for 5 years, and he was on the Suloxine. And I started getting him on the raw food diet with the herbs, and I started doing some glandular therapy with him, and I was able to get him off his meds within 3 months, whereas the vets are like, you can never do that. And so I've seen what's possible with the diet. It's just that, for me, I feel like after about 7 or 8 years, it's kind of like the vegan thing. I felt great the first 5 years, but then long term, you start falling apart. It's the same thing with a raw food diet, right? For the dogs, because they got to make sure they're having other stuff. So one of the things I found worked for me, and this was just something from trial and error, because I'm always trying to learn and adapt and grow and, just keep myself on my toes, is what worked for me until, recent is I would do like 4 raw meat days and then maybe a couple fruit days, or I would do maybe a sweet potato, like I would offset the amount of fat they were having. And I was also going through a company that's out in San Diego that basically, grinds the food and puts a little bit of veggies in it. And that seems to be fine, but I do feel like it's too fatty. You know what I mean? And so then you're having that excess fat is causing problems. So this is kind of what I'm found, and I'm always trying to, adjust. And, the other thing is too, is when I work with clients, it's like, they condition their dogs because they're giving them treats or whatever. So, I believe in fasting too. Like I tell people, like, if you can fast your dog 1 day a week, I think it's great for them. I really am an advocate of that. Or, do a day of fruit just to offset all this stuff. And one of the reasons I started doing that is probably because of my background with, I think fruit is okay for dogs. And then I studied I was starting to pay attention to the Wolf Voyager project. And they were showing that like during certain seasons, the wolves were eating like 80% berries, even when there was other foods around, and they were thriving, and it was seasonal, not to say, a dog can live on fruit, because unfortunately I know people in the raw food world that it killed me. They were just feeding their dogs fruit for a year, and these dogs looked terrible, and they just thought they were detoxing. So this idea of detox is also being done with pets, and it's scary. We've got both sides. Like, I'm always trying to bridge the two because it makes sense to me in the wild. Like, they've seen wolves climbing trees and eating apples, but yeah, their diet is primarily, the kill. I'm not a big vegetable person with the dogs. I think it's fine with fiber. I don't think it's going to hurt them, but you just kind of have to find what works. And I think older dogs have everyone has a little different situation, just like people, so that's kind of how I work, and what I found to be successful. So my biggest thing now is just to make sure that if people are doing raw, that they're supplementing, and most people don't, as you know, Ryan, most people don't know about supplementation. They don't get it, or they'll do one thing,
Of course.
And, besides, I think longevity, I don't think there's any really way to do it yourself. Is there? I mean, it would be so costly.
There's nobody else that does the 90 essential nutrients like us, that creates a
Right.
baseline like that. There is some holes and some gaps that could be filled in. I've learned to fill them in the business, and there's reasons why they can't all be in the baseline products. Just quick example. If you're low on zinc, I use what I call a zinc flush. It's a high dose of zinc. Your doctor might tell you it's a dangerous dose. I'm talking about 100 to 150 milligrams per day for an adult. If they're closer to 100 pounds, it'll be 100. If they're 150 pounds or more, it'll be 150. That's way over the RDA, and some might say that's a toxic dose. This is a short-term dose. I'm just saying we wouldn't put 150 milligrams in a daily general multivitamin supplement. That would not be suitable for everybody. So there's certain gaps that you just can't cover in a baseline general program like that. I
Right.
want to step back a little bit, and then I want to give my opinion on what I would do for dogs now, my current opinion. I worked in the exotic pet industry. We bred and sold snakes, geckos, arachnids, tarantulas, scorpions, centipedes, other
Wow.
lizards, it's just this type of stuff. And the feeders that fed them, the rats and the mice and guinea pigs and rabbits and all that stuff. The rodents did absolutely fantastic on pelleted food and nothing else. Absolutely fantastic. No problems at all. Of course, this is not what most people are coming to us with. Dogs and cats are a little bit more complicated and they have much longer lifespans. So you have more time to see something go wrong. But in the exotic industry, we have done such incredible things. Unbelievable. I'm talking about double, triple, quadruple, every species that you can name. Double is the minimum. Like of what, we grew up with these like wildlife fact file books from Reader's Digest or whatever. Whatever it said the animal lived in the wild, the minimum in the pet industry was double that.
Yeah.
And in many, many cases, it's triple, quadruple, or even more. And you're not going to find this by Googling it in Guinness World Records and stuff because it's a hobbyist industry, but we have plenty of people with 20-year-old geckos. We had some geckos live to 20, and they're supposed to live 7 years or 5 years in the wild, and just unbelievable success. And the way that we did it, I'm not talking about me personally and our company and whatever, just the animal supplement business. If you go to the pet store, there's bird pellets, there's rat pellets, there's rabbit pellets. And if you have a reptile, there's snake powder, gecko powder,
Wow.
Argentinian tegu powder, whatever your species is, there's a powder for that. So the way that we've achieved such massive success in longevity, reproductive health, and even, some of these species, it would say, oh, expect 8 snakes to come out. You'd get 12, you'd get 16, you'd get 20. Crazy. Because a lot of people went overboard with the supplements because we realized how well it worked. So this is the secret. We'd use their natural food and we'd cover it in powder. Or we'd stuff the mouse, dead. You're supposed to feed them dead. You're not supposed to feed them live because it can bite your snake and cause a problem. Kill it. It could kill it in some cases. And nobody wants to buy a snake with a missing eye. These things can happen. So you kill the mouse first, and then you stuff the mouse full of pellets, vitamins, raw minerals. And if you didn't do that, you would start to see a problem quite quickly, right? Because snakes don't just eat mice. They do eat mice, but they also hang out in puddles. They drink from puddles. Honestly, I think that's like the biggest thing. Puddles leach in minerals from leaves and from the soil and whatever. There's some mineral-rich concoction. That's what they drink from. They don't drink distilled water or tap water with fluoride in it, which competes for iodine in a snake just like it does for a human. So we stuff the mice, or we take the crickets or the cockroaches or the mealworms or whatever, and we'd shake them up in a bag full of this powder and it'd cover all the animals. And so they're just, instead of getting just a cricket, they're getting a supplemented cricket. And all of a sudden, our animals are living double, triple, quadruple, or even more. Like, again, incredible. And in terms of size as well, like, in fact, in the industry, it was called animal abuse if you didn't supplement your animals. That's abuse. If you just feed your snakes mice, other people are going to get upset with you and call you out about it. And honestly, on the forums and stuff, this is before social media. We had forums, and people would freak out at you for not supplementing your animals. They'd say, you are cruel and unusual. What are you doing?
Wow.
And with any regular species too, talking about simple things, ball pythons and crested geckos and stuff, they would just stop eating after a while. If you just fed them the crickets or you just fed them the mice, you got 6 months, maybe 2 years before they're just going to stop eating. They're going to not be interested in eating because they